Alright, example 4 in section 8.6 is still solving. This time we've got a little bit harder question. We've got two terms on the left-hand side and one on the right, so we still cannot cross-multiply. But this one's going to be a little bit more difficult than the one we saw in examples 1 and 3. We're still going to multiply both sides by what needs to be multiplied by to get the denominators to cancel. Now, sometimes we may have to factor. In this case, there's nothing to factor on the bottoms. So what we're going to do is we're going to multiply both sides by what shows up on the bottom. If you notice, we have an x on the bottom. We'll multiply both sides by an x. And we also have an x minus 5. So we'll multiply both sides by an x minus 5. This one does not have a denominator that we have to worry about. So we have the x and the x minus 5. We're going to multiply that to both sides. So when we do that, the fractions should go away. And since we're multiplying this to everything, we have to multiply it to the 1 as well. And since there is no fraction, nothing's going to cancel. So it's just 1 times this. Well, anything times 1 is just itself. The minus sign drops. Then we're going to multiply these two together. And this time, the x minus 5s will cancel. So all we have left is the x and the 8 that multiply to get 8x. So if you notice, we no longer have a fraction on the right, or I'm sorry, on the left. Now we have to worry about the right-hand sides. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to multiply these two together. The x's will cancel. You're left with the 3 and the x minus 5. So just like the previous problems, we have to simplify to see what we're dealing with. So I'm going to go ahead and distribute. So I get x squared minus 5x. The minus 8x drops. Distribute the right as well to get 3x minus 15. And I can already tell that I'm dealing with a quadratic. We've got this x squared. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simplify and then get it set equal to 0. So I'm going to combine like terms first. Negative 5 minus 8 is negative 13x. And then my next step is going to be to get this set equal to 0 so that we can factor and solve. So I'm going to subtract the 3x and add the 15 to both sides. That way when I do that, these two cancel, which gets me a 0, which is what I want. And on the left-hand side, the x squared drops. Negative 13 minus 3 for the x's is negative 16. And then the plus 15 has nothing to add to, so it just drops down. And like I said before in the previous videos, most of these will be factorable at the end. So in this case, factors of 15 that get you negative 16 are negative 15 and negative 1. You should be able to factor that pretty quickly. Set both of these equal to 0. And you'll get your two answers. Add the 15 over, you get x equals 15. Add the 1 over, and you get x equals 1. Now, what we have to be careful with, though, like I said in the previous video, we could have what are called extraneous solutions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to test 15 first by storing it as x. I'm going to type in the original, which is 1 minus 8 over x minus 5. I'm going to hit enter. And I'm also going to do 3 over x. If you notice, they're the same. So 15 is a solution. If I type in 1, let's see what happens there. If I do 1 store x, and I go back up here and I scroll up and I hit enter on the left-hand side, it's going to get me 3. And if I do that with the other one, it also gets me 3. So both of these work. Neither one of these are extraneous. Those are my two answers. Alright, example 4 is probably the last one we have on this video, and then I'll do the last example on the last video. Example 4, same thing. Looks a little bit different, but it's the same concept. We've got two terms on the left, one on the right. We're going to try to get those fractions to go away. Nothing to be factored here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply both sides by the x that shows up on the bottom, and also the x plus 1 that shows up on the bottom. And what I'm trying to do is get these to cancel. So now multiply these two, The x plus 1s will cancel. I'm left with the x and what's on the top here, which is negative x plus 1. And when I do this to the other side, the other number here, the plus drops. The 2 and the x can multiply to get 2x, and then the x plus 1 is just going to come along. I'll multiply that out later. So my fraction has gone over here. I've done my job. Equals. When I multiply these two, the x's cancel. I'm left with 1 times x plus 1. Well, anything times 1 is just itself. So if you don't get the fractions to cancel, then you need to stop and start over. Pretty clearly, we don't have any more fractions now. The rest of this is all stuff that we've done in previous chapters. It's just knowing how to simplify and solve basic quadratics. So x and negative x is negative x squared. X and 1 is 1x. 2x times x is 2x squared. 2x times 1 is 2x. And then the x plus 1 drops for the time being. And again, we're dealing with a quadratic here. You notice we've got x squared, so we're going to simplify, get all of this set equal to 0, and then factor and solve. So I'm going to combine my like terms. I've got 2x squared and negative 1x squared. That gets me a 1x squared. I've got x plus 2x. That gets me a 3x. So it's now simplified. Now we want to get it set equal to 0. So I'm going to move the x and the 1 over by doing the opposite. Those will cancel to get set equal to 0. And then over here, the x squared drops. There's nothing to change it. Positive 3x minus 1x leaves you with a positive 2x. The minus 1 has nothing to combine to, so it stays a minus 1. And in this particular problem, this one actually is not factorable. There are no factors in negative 1 that get you 2. So the only other route that we have, which could potentially happen, is to do the quadratic formula. So I'm going to write this formula down, and we'll see what happens here. So my b is 2, so negative b is negative 2, plus and minus b squared, which is 2 squared, minus 4a, which is 1, c, which is negative 1. This is all stuff that you should know how to do already from chapter 4. And then all over 2 times a is 1. So negative 2 drops. 2 times 1 on the bottom is 2. I'm going to type in what's underneath the square root. I'm going to type in just the 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 1. And it gets you a 0. Make sure I type it in right. 2 squared minus 4 times, yeah, I thought that was wrong. I'm going to type it in again. 2 squared minus 4 times positive 1 times a negative 1. And that gets you an 8. Okay, so it's going to be the square root of 8. Now this can be reduced. Remember, the square root of 8, this is all stuff we learned in chapter 4. This is a lot of material, but you need to know how to do this stuff. 8 I can break down by doing the factor tree. A 2 can come out. And then this 2 stays inside the square root. So that is my answer, but I can simplify this because all of these are 2's. So I can divide that 2 out. Negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. 2 divided by 2 is positive 1, square root of 2. Now, most problems don't work out that way, but it was good that you saw this in the video. That way, if you come across it, you'll know what to do. But just because it's not factorable doesn't mean you didn't do something correctly. It just means you may have to do it another way to get your solution.